welcome Curt and his debaters. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Where's my clicker? Oh, you're right here. Okay. So, did I not do that right? I got it. How do I work the clicker? Paul? Oh, to the right, to the right. Here we go. Okay, to AI or not AI, that is the question. I have to say that we are at an inflection point. This inflection point, we have an insane acceleration curve in technology based on AI. Combine that with the evolution of the human race, combined with the future of work. But let's talk about streaming. So, adopt or perish. It's kind of a harsh tagline, but it's the one I launched my AI consultancy with. But what I believe is that with the disruption of AI, it's going to be the education and evangelism of AI to fight the disruption and educate everyone on the pros and cons, have conversations like we're having here. I have a podcast, we have conversations on AI, and it's that is going to be what's going to take us to the next level. And so, unfortunately, what has hijacked the conversation is the Hollywood dystopian narrative, okay? Thank you, James Cameron. I still love this movie, but adopt and die has been the fatalistic view of where we are with AI. And the adoption in Hollywood of AI has been one of the slowest adoptions in the entire world of industry. And why is that? Well, union strikes, deep fakes, IP theft, you name it, but it's also mindset. And it's the mindset that needs to change. And I spent a lot of time lecturing at schools and companies about mindset. We need to move from AI hacks making AI movies to actually using true creatives harnessing these AI tools to make real films. We need to move from a robot-centered AI, which is a huge branding problem, to a human-centered AI. And I would go further to say we need to have a creative-centered AI, okay? Putting true creatives in the driver's seat, which is where they need to be. It is a mindset, it is a choice. And so I like to think of it as now adopt and thrive, the positive aspect that Robert was talking about in the last session. We need to harness data in a new way, when it's legal and ethical, moving from LLMs to SLMs. We need to move from big tech to alt tech. We need to move from novelty to utility. We need to fight AI with AI and innovate for good. More importantly, we need to find our inner fire of innovation and create a space where we can be supercharged, we can become superhuman, not become lazy, and not become robots. So, what does this AI future hold? Here to help us, we have 4 experts, 2 you've already heard from already, but happy to have them again in the panel. We have many points of view, and they're all entangled, but these experts, whether they're a futurist, a lawyer, a marketer, or an entertainment executive, we have a good representation here, and we're going to debate, discuss, and dissect what the hell's going on with AI. So, introducing first, I'm going to do the introductions. Robert Tercek, I heard him speak at a mobile conference 12 years ago. I've been a fan ever since. And Rob has launched TV networks, streaming services, and game platforms in more than 50 countries. Today, he advises CEOs and government agencies on long-term strategy through his advisory general creativity. Welcome, Robert. And then we have Karissa Price. Thank you for joining. She's a Harvard PhD, former VP Marketing at Walmart, and currently the CMO of Dragonfruit.ai, actual AI company. computer vision AI company, and she uses AI daily in her marketing. So she's a practitioner as well. Her favorite movies, ironically, are Matrix and Idiocracy, even though I think your company is really going to bring the Minority Report to life in a new way in the near future. Team 2, we are divided into 2 teams. So we have Peter Csathy, who is a media, entertainment, AI, and tech expert who has just worn about every hat in the media business, and he began as an entertainment lawyer, and was a lead deal maker at Universal Studios, then served as CEO and president of several pioneering tech-forward media companies with successful exits. He writes a weekly expert column on media, AI, and tech in The Wrap. Thank you, Peter, for coming. And last, Guy Bisson, experienced media and entertainment analyst and commentator with an in-depth knowledge of the international television business across the entire industry value chain. So it's going to be different with this panel, but let's go over the rules. So each speaker will give a 5-minute presentation. I'll control the slides here. And each speaker will get 5 minutes, and then will be cross-examined by the other team, one-on-one, 5 minutes each, or 10 minutes total, and you go back and forth, but it will be timed. We have Paul, who's controlling the cowbell, which will ring when the time is up, so try to make your points quickly. Each speaker will then present their closing statements in 2 minutes, and I'll do a little summary at the end, so please don't go over your time. It'll be intense. And so we're going to start and get into it. There's the rules, and we're going to start with Robert, go.
Okay, great.
Okay, since I have to go after you and cross-examine you, I better take notes, right?
Oh, you know all this stuff already. Is this coming out of my time?
Reclaim your time.
Okay, I'm Rob Tercek, and I believe that the future is bright, and I also believe, paradoxically, that the media companies are going to do everything they possibly can to fight it. Let's flip. Okay. So every single person in this room, and frankly everybody with a smartphone, uses artificial intelligence every single day. Every time you use your phone, you use AI. Whether it's to do a Google search or to get turn-by-turn directions from Google Maps, or if you're looking at social media feeds or any recommendations for shopping, or if you're using a translation app, or even that face recognition that unlocks your phone. That's all versions of artificial intelligence. We use them every day. Flip. Wow, I'm faster than the remote.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe you can manually click the keyboard, like a forward arrow.
I don't know what's going on here. Oh, the battery is running low.
We gotta do it the old-fashioned.
That's not good. Okay, here we go. There we go.
Great, thanks. Okay, carrying on here. So the same is true with streaming media. So if you think about the entire infrastructure for streaming media, whether it's how we target and serve ads to individual users, or the recommendations that are made when you're looking at Netflix, or even the algorithms that determine whether or not a show is going to get renewed for another season. These are all versions of artificial intelligence. My point here is simple. We already use AI, and when it works, we're going to use more and more of it. And as these systems improve, and as they get cheaper and cheaper, we're going to adopt more and more of it. Go ahead, next slide. So meanwhile, there's this weird trend where the media industry is going to fight this, and they tend to do this with every new technological innovation. They've done it since the beginning of cable television. Actually, the movie industry's resisted broadcast resisted cable and broadcast resisted home video. Then they went on to make billions of dollars from home video. They loved that. Then they resisted streaming and so on. So there's a reflexive instinct to fight back. Flip to the next slide. And usually this reflex is kind of, the air cover for it is a kind of moral panic. So they'll make a moral argument about good versus evil. And right now we're seeing that with AI, the copyright controversy pits the good companies, the creatives, the artists, against the bad companies, the technologists that are stealing IP and so forth. To me, this is a smokescreen, and it's just as bad as the smokescreen that the media industry used when they went to Congress to complain about VCRs. And they said that they were akin to the Boston Strangler for the media business. And they kept up the moral panic until they figured out the economics, and then, of course, they stopped talking about the Boston Strangler, and they loved home video. Next slide. So what's really behind the moral panic and the smokescreen is an issue about revenue. And this is really what's driving the media industry. It's very hard to make money in a hit-driven business. It's very hard to stabilize income in that field. And so as soon as they hit a formula that they think they can stabilize on and be profitable, they want to protect it. And of course, technology comes and destabilizes. That's where the friction occurs. Next slide. So the problem with that resistance is that the people who hear the message of go slow tend to be the people that work for the media industry. There are really smart, innovative people inside of every technology company, but unfortunately, they're getting a signal from their management that this stuff is evil and bad and wrong, and therefore they shouldn't pursue it because they're not going to get promoted inside of the hierarchy and they're not going to get the resources to advance it. Flip to the next slide, and that means there's a green light for disruptive technology companies outside of those companies, and typically progress is made by the disruptors. Next slide. This actually has worked to grow the media industry. So contrary to the reports that you're hearing from the media business, we are growing on a worldwide basis. Media continues to grow towards $3 trillion. We're about $2.8 trillion. That's on a worldwide basis. But there's an issue here in the United States. Next slide. And that is that revenue in the TV and video industry specifically has been flat for 5 years at about $230 billion. It hasn't budged. Within that segment, it has been redistributed. That segment, video in the US, covers everything from broadcast, cable, satellite television, as well as streaming, SVOD, and FAST, and YouTube. So the total number hasn't gone up. Of course, within those segments, it's been redistributed. So that's a real problem because costs are continuing to rise. TV companies are all trying to launch their own streaming services, and these are fabulously expensive projects. And so, next slide. It's inevitable that we're going to adopt automation. It's not just necessary, it is an inevitability. Let me wrap up with 2 predictions. Next slide. The first one is that generative AI is going to continue to get better and better. The tools that we have today are the worst they'll ever be. And at the bottom of the slide, you can see my forecast is within the next 5 years, one person will be able to generate a feature-length film using generative AI tools. However, I don't think that's actually going to be very practical because I think it's still a team-based collaborative activity that requires human talent. And that's why I think that it's going to create more jobs than it eliminates. Let's go to the next slide. My other prediction here is that any attempt to resist this is doomed to fail. That's how I ended the last session. I fully believe that. What the talent guilds did, they had no choice. They created a set of rules that the studios are bound to oblige to observe. And all that does is create an opportunity or an incentive to launch a business in another jurisdiction where you're not bound to that. All of the growth right now in streaming video is happening in services that are not bound to those guild contracts like YouTube and TikTok. Same thing is true with the copyright laws. Peter and I dispute this hotly. We'll probably do that here. But my feeling is that the copyright laws, the way they're being applied right now, bummer.
Okay. Now we're on to, thank you very much. Lightning round continues. Okay, Peter.
All right. Wow. Where do I begin? Okay. So why don't we begin with that? I only have one presentation, and that is a
I
video.
think my power just went out. The what? The bat, yeah. Is there
And then I'll lay it out. But while we're waiting, I agree with much of what you say. And you know that I do. But when you say it's all about the money, of course it's all about the money. Yeah, it's always all about the money. It's about how the money is split and how the money is taken.
As soon as the
And
studios,
how the value is created.
as soon as the studios and the publishers figure out a licensing model that works, where they get paid for training big models, I guarantee this moral fervor around authors' rights is just going to disappear.
So I think you used moral panic, and the word that I'm going to get into a little bit is ethically sourced AI, which is the flip side, perhaps, of moral panic. But the big issue, everybody, and then I'll get into things. But the big issue is that, and I've led tech-forward media companies, so I'm not afraid of technology. What you're saying, the fundamental point that you're making is that if you don't adopt or don't accept it and don't learn how to live with it and don't learn how to leverage it, you are extremely vulnerable. That is true. But I would disagree with the fact that Hollywood is trying to stop it, and now roll video.
I can't.
Oh, you can't.
But you can talk about it. You can.
That was Rob.
Everyone's seen it.
Okay, that was Robert. He was behind. I saw him. Okay.
So someone
you've all-
unplugged the AI, I think.
How many people have seen the Apple Crush video?
Yeah, everyone's seen it.
Okay, not everybody, but the Apple Crush video is shocking because it comes from Apple, which bills itself as being the most creative-friendly company in the world, right? So you have this general angst that we're talking about in the creative community about what's going to happen. And it's angst in life. Like, we're all facing angst in terms of what that means. So it's natural to fear. That doesn't mean you want to stop it, but it's natural to have trepidation about it. So the Apple video is it's a new iPad commercial.
No.
You have this massive press that essentially is above all of human creativity and all instruments and art and everything like that. And then it just comes down and slowly squashes it, so the strings off the violin go flinging off and just discarded. And essentially, it goes down to a beautiful, thin iPad. And we know what Apple had a thought of what it was trying to show by that. But to a lot of people, it was tone deaf in the sense of it's essentially taking all of human creativity and crushing it down and giving it all over to big tech, essentially. That's the way that was felt, especially in and around this time. And big tech, and Apple did the right thing by immediately apologizing for it, and I think it yanked it pretty much completely. But anyhow, that's the video. And the reason why I start with that is because that is just the emotional landscape. And there is an emotional component to just that fact that as artists, we, everybody who creates works has some kind of agency over it. You want to have agency over it, some sort of control. And then if your art is used as an ingredient to create value for somebody else, then you should share in the value that's created. That is the fundamental difference, I think, that we have. So I'm not looking at this emotionally. I'm looking at this very stoically, and I use that word all the time when I talk to Robert. But I look at, because this is the world we live in. We need to learn. Hollywood needs to learn. The media, streamers, everybody needs to learn. We've used AI in a significant sense, like you laid out already. It's such a part of our lives, but generative AI is very different. And the real problem, and I touch upon it, is the fact that you had all this value that's been created by the big tech companies. Microsoft OpenAI is valued at $3.12 trillion right now, $3.12 trillion. Meanwhile, Disney, the fairest media company of them all, is valued at about $185 billion, so at about 6% of that. So when you look at, over the years, what has happened when you have the march of technology, let's take YouTube as an example. So technology moves so fast. We see these patterns over time. It's not that Hollywood's trying to stop it, but trying to make sense of it all, which makes, that makes sense because things move so slowly. You had a business model that was fundamentally in place. YouTube comes in, and it's this upstart company with some cool technology. I was there. Like, I was literally there, seeing it all happen. And it started taking off, but it really took off when copyrighted works, film, television, were starting to be uploaded. Like that famous SNL Lazy Sunday, that's the sketch that kind of showed when it really took off. And then lo and behold, $1.65 billion later, YouTube was bought by Google. And then lo and behold, Google's now $2.2 trillion, and YouTube's got to be 20% of that. So look at that massive amount of value that was transferred there. We're seeing the same thing in generative AI. And ultimately, there will be a licensing scheme of some kind. I completely agree with that. But here's the problem. Because technology always moves so fast, whatever licensing scheme comes into play is going to be seen just really, really quickly. It's going to be seen as pennies when it looks like big dollars today. And here's another fundamental point. Much of that damage has already been done because that value has been transferred up to this point without consent. And so the valuations of the big tech companies have only gotten bigger. Meanwhile, the media companies are just trying to figure it all out. Not because they're trying to stop it, but because they're trying to make sense of it all and share fairly in the value.
Okay, thank you very much. We need to move on to Karissa. And how do we get to that? And we may get your slides up, but why don't you start?
Great. While we're waiting for the slides, so I sit here, unlike the first panel, as the Chief Marketing Officer of an AI company. Here, I'm bringing the perspective of a social scientist and an author. So I just published a book on why is a verb, how do we harness purpose to drive greater productivity. And I didn't think that that would actually be interesting in a panel on AI until I started to see some of the comments and presentations of others and realized, well, what are we afraid of with AI? Obviously, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of consternation. There's always the economics. If you want to know why things don't change, doesn't matter what the industry is, streaming media, healthcare, follow the money. I think you made that point earlier in the previous panel, Robert, of like, why do these things not change? People are making money just like they are, and people are going to fight over any change or threatening to their money. This is my last slide. We go to the
First?
Okay, so why are we so frightened of AI? So in my book, we did some research about the history of productivity and purpose. We as humans need purpose. We need a sense of purpose. And we as humans in a society that is generating progress and change need productivity. So just a quick feature or facts on that. Productivity has risen 65% over the last decades. This is driven by technology. But wages have only grown 15%. So when we say we're fighting about money, this is a bigger fight than just technology companies versus media companies. This is about who does the benefit of productivity and technological progress accrue to. Now let's talk about something else called algorithmic work versus heuristic work. Algorithmic work is work that can be replaced by AI. It's repetitive, it's patterned, you can replace it. Goldman Sachs estimates about 30% of our work is algorithmic and will be replaced by AI. The rest, heuristic work, which is creative, which is what we're talking about here, but truly creative, right? Things that do not have a pattern to them that cannot be replaced by machine. That's the other 70%. So now think about that. The average person today, this is from Gallup, is only working 3 hours a day. Why? Because they're burnt out, because they were told they had to go to the office, because their child is sick, because they're just not engaged. Engagement rates of employees, this is globally, not just here in the US, have been falling for decades. Why? Because they know these facts. They know that the big man in the corporation is feeding them a line of bull and wants them to believe that, oh, their investments in the environment and all of these things, they're for you, while the rich get richer and the working person gets poorer. This isn't a recent phenomenon in the last 4 years. This has been going on for decades in our society. So now you bring AI, and AI is going to replace 30% of those jobs. Now what? Of course people are nervous. Of course people are fighting over these things. Of course people are striking over these things. Our system right here globally is teetering on disaster, and now you're bringing technological change to make that even faster. Next slide. So, which narrative will we choose as a society, as people? Hollywood has struck fear in us, as you said, Curt, right? The Matrix is one of my favorite movies of all time. But think about what the premise behind The Matrix is. We are reduced to power sources for the machines. So that's door number one. Door number two, idiocracy. Well, we're already living that. I think most of us can agree. Where Macho Camacho may be our next president. People like that. We ban books. We defund education. Door number two, idiocracy. Door number three, Curt, you already alluded to, Terminator, right? But that relationship between man and machine, it's not a good one in that series of movies. And then last, but certainly not least, is WALL-E. Now think about WALL-E as a movie. You may think this is a kid's movie, but it is a deep social commentary on the world that we're living in today. So the future is kind of rosier. We're fat and happy, flowing around on these little hover machines. We've killed our planet. We've killed the environment. Is that really the future we want too? All of these things are present here. God bless the creatives that have put their thought to and their creativity to presenting options for us in the future. So as I said in the last panel, it's not clear to me who the winners or losers of AI are going to be. But it's up to us as human beings on this planet right now to make those as conscious choices. And we're making it every day when we sign in to our social media accounts, when we use our phones, when we don't vote, when we don't participate in our democracy. We have choices here, people. AI is not going to make these choices for us. We can choose how we want to use it.
Okay, let's move on to Guy.
Okay, thank you. Next slide.
Okay.
So I think we've been here before, On this scatter plot, I've put a number of recent and not so recent innovations that we have witnessed in the entertainment industry on a hype impact vertical. Some of them actually have had impact. Many of them have not. Digital television, we probably hardly even think of, had a fundamental impact on the way the whole content industry sells content around the world and the demand for that content around the world. Others, like NFTs, perhaps rather overhyped. Where does AI sit? If you could go to the next slide. Where does AI sit on the spectrum? It certainly sits to the right. It is hyped. Is it going to have impact? That's what we're trying to answer today. Let's be very clear. There are 3 types of AI, and we've already alluded to one, the Terminator one, which is artificial general intelligence. We do not have that. Let's be very clear. That's something that's going to come in the future. Generative AI and discriminative AI we do have, and they provide very useful tools. I fundamentally disagree with Robert, and I completely agree with him. Where I fundamentally disagree is that media companies will do everything they can to fight it. I believe Hollywood and media companies will be the innovators in the use of AI in the production of film and television. But on many of the other points that he made, I think we're broadly aligned. So let me ask a question, and then I'm going to answer it straight away. How many jobs have been lost in Hollywood, have been lost to AI today? None. None whatsoever. But let me be very clear. Every single job in Hollywood will be impacted by AI within the next few years. Next slide, please. So, another movie analogy, we've had a few, Blade Runner. Blade Runner was the opening scene. We had a replicant, an artificially intelligent android, being questioned by a Blade Runner. That interview was based on a test called the Turing test, which was developed by Alan Turing, the wartime code breaker who broke the Enigma code. He called it the imitation game. The android in that scene failed the test on emotional intelligence, and he killed the Blade Runner. Next slide, please. Next slide. So he failed. ChatGPT-3 also fails that test. Next slide. But ChatGPT-4, according to researchers at Stanford just last month, passes, and not only passes, but passes with flying colors. So fundamentally, what about the value chain? And where are we in terms of replacing old with new processes in Hollywood? AI is already pretty good at localization, dubbing and subtitling, but it's not quite there yet. It's already pretty good at face swapping. It's already pretty good at special effects, but it's not quite there yet. And the common denominator in all of these tools is that there is a human operator and a human intelligence behind them. Another point I agree with Robert, in 5 years' time, from your bedroom, a single person, from concept through to creation and production, will be able to create a movie. Does that mean the end of Hollywood as we know it? Absolutely not. We've been here before, and again, I think Robert already made the point. Television was going to destroy Hollywood. The home entertainment industry was going to destroy it. Streaming was going to destroy it. COVID was going to destroy it. None of them actually did. AI is a threat to every single job that is based on old technology in Hollywood. But just think back 15 years when we went through the digital transition. How many negative cutters are employed today? How many projectionists? How many processing labs? How many cell animators? Hollywood did not collapse. It evolved to adopt the new technologies. And we are in the phase We're right at the beginning, 18 months since the public release of ChatGPT. We are in... Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so now we get into our cross-examination and rebuttals. Team 1, Robert, questions Team 2, Peter, on his statements in his opening statement.
What a pleasure.
Since we have 5 minutes each, why don't we just do the 10 minutes?
Or you can take the 10 minutes and argue with each other, please.
Bash away at each other. I love that. All right, so what I picked up from your comments is that you have a feeling that the technology companies are somehow unfairly demolishing or dismantling business models that have been around for a while, and then they get the benefit of that. And that's my definition of innovation, and actually I think that's the prize that's at stake. And I think the companies that do that most aggressively are the companies that drive forward the economy. Those are the forces of progress.
Okay, can I comment on that?
Sure.
Okay. No, I'm not. I don't think I've ever said that technology is trying to destroy Hollywood or do anything along those lines. I think that, as I said, fundamentally, technology always transforms anything and transforms media and entertainment. It's a question about the value, the ingredients to create the value, and then the output of the ingredients. And so in the case of generative AI technology is useless unless it has content as the ingredient on which to feed so that it can be smart and then do its thing. So there is no, let me finish, and then we'll,
Keep going, guys.
Respect.
Keep going. Clock's ticking.
Yeah. So there's just a question of licensing itself so that the works that are used as ingredients are paid for and there's consent for those works. So it's not a question of destroying, it's a question of recognizing the value for that, and then once value is created based on those ingredients, what the share is. There's no one right answer to any of that stuff, but right now, the way that it's been is there's been, as I mentioned before, this hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of value that's already been created. So the question I'm going to ask you, you can respond to me, but the question that I'm going to ask you is what's going to be done with all the value that's already been generated so far, and how are the creative communities able to recapture some of that, which is not a grab, which is just recognition that it is a central ingredient in terms of creating value.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. The first point I would make is that you said that the large language models are useless without content. That's not exactly true. They require a lot of data. That could be content, doesn't necessarily have to be. And I think what's at issue here is copyrighted works are really what you're pointing to, right? Those copyrighted works, your feeling is if someone is making use of them without permission or consent, they need to pay for that, right? That's contentious. We're going to find out in court whether or not it's fair use. My perspective on that is there is no law against looking at a picture, and there's no law against reading a book. And whether that's done by a human or by a machine, so far we have no case law to suggest that that's against the law. And that is the premise that the technology companies are using. Now, they might be found to be infringing, right? We don't know whether that's fair use or not, but they have 20 years of case law that suggests that it is fair use. We're going to find out. You and I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, so I got to touch, but the only way I think we can do it is if we kind of go right back at each other. So when you have a human copying is not the same as big tech copying through whole systems
There's
because
no copying being done. You have to prove that.
well, first of all,
No LLM contains a copy of Franzen's The Corrections, right? That doesn't
by the way,
exist.
I asked Perplexity whether copying in the traditional sense is necessary for there to be potentially infringement here. And Perplexity, Gen AI, tells me no, it's not, because it's all based on context. When you talk about the law, this is a new context that has not been reached. And by the way, the Google Books case is Second Circuit Court of Appeals. It's not Supreme Court law of the land. But I want to get back to the difference between human and systems. Yeah, humans from the beginnings of time, creators have been inspired by, copied. Even when individuals copy too much, there's infringement. But we're talking about whole systems that are being designed for billions of people to use as market substitutions for everything. That's the fundamental. So you can't do this false comparison that a human is the same as big tech that's churning and burning and taking millions of these copyrighted works without any kind of compensation. So I disregard that point.
Hang on, sorry. So like Sarah Silverman has a case right now against Stability and some of the other OpenAI and some of the other tech companies. Do you really think any user of ChatGPT is using ChatGPT to regenerate bedwetter, that wonderful book by Sarah Silverman. The fact is, no one is using it that way.
Okay, so the copyright has there's two answers to that question. Copyright analysis has the input side and the output side. So you're talking about output there, but you haven't addressed the input side, which is taking in Sarah Silverman's works and everybody else's works and using that as food to be able to create value.
Which is what every creative person has ever done in the history of humanity. That's how we teach art.
But
that's how we teach writing.
But not
That's how humans learn to create. And actually, that is the whole purpose of the public domain and the purpose of fair use, is to allow a next generation to learn from the works of previous generations.
Yeah.
So why is that against the law?
Well, I already mentioned the fact that entire systems that are used as market replacements are fundamentally different than somebody who's coming in as an individual artist. There's that part of it. Secondly, even in the Sarah Silverman case, so there's the output side. Yes, we can all disregard that somebody's going to use it to replace Sarah Silverman's book, but we do have the New York Times case that has made allegations that if you input certain things, outspits verbatim feature articles that were behind a paywall for the New York Times, and the New York Times spent millions of dollars on creating these feature stories, et cetera. So even in the Sarah Silverman case, we don't know exactly what Gen AI is going to do. We know that it absorbed her work, and if somebody says, I don't want to buy Sarah Silverman's book, I'm just going to search, I'm going to use Perplexity to get a summary of chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Summary is
6,
permissible under fair use. Sorry,
Not
this
if
argument
not
doesn't
if it's
hold
a
water.
whole market replacement.
The argument doesn't hold
it
water, and you haven't demonstrated yet that any copies are being made. For the folks who don't know how these systems work, they're not making copies. When you train a large language model, it's a mathematical representation of something, right? So it's making observations, factual observations. Copying facts is permissible under copyright law. Factual observations, basically small measurements. Think of like someone going through an art museum making all kinds of incremental measurements about a Van Gogh painting or a Monet painting, how many colors they use, what palette they use, how long the lines and brush strokes are, and so forth. Imagine if you went and did that kind of like infinitesimal measurement, and then were able to generate works in the style of that person. No copying is being done. That is permissible fair use.
Okay, so you're telling me that, okay, first of all, and we touched upon it a little bit, we don't know what this context will hold because it's novel. This is novel. So something that the courts will reach. And not that I have great faith that the courts are going to come up with anything brilliant, but nonetheless, they'll come up with something. The test is actually accessing or ingesting whether that's enough. And copying in a traditional sense, that definition and that kind of cute sort of discussion about it doesn't make sense when there's an entirely new situation, because an old argument is always going to be used for something new, but it doesn't mean that it's the correct thing. So I don't think that like focusing on that part of it is going to work. I think it's really going to be a question of ultimately what fair use is, and fair use will be defined by the courts, but fair use ultimately is about public policy. And so public policy is whether there's a net good or a net negative, kind of at a very high level. Guys.
Thank you. And let me offer this. If you're creating a capability that allows billions of people to increase their expressive potential, to unlock the great expressive potential in half of humanity, versus protecting the rights of a few hundred authors, I think a court is going to look at that and say, actually, these systems are being used currently by hundreds of millions of people who seem to like them, and none of them are trying to replicate David Franzen's work. I think you're going to see the courts are very practical in their ruling.
I think the courts are going to be very practical in the sense of looking at not saying that individual users should not be using these tools or trying to slow that down. They're going to be looking at where the value has been created and having some kind of framework that says that there can't just be a simple taking and to use it to create systems that replace whole other kinds of systems. Here's an example. Just last week was Google I/O. And Google I/O, it's kind of under the radar based on a lot of things that are going on, but Google I/O just introduced a new version of search. And in its new version of search, it has something called overview. And search overview is that you search like, whatever, and you have individual links still below, but you'll have a nice summary that's right above, and it will now be a great way to never have to look at a link below. And so what's happening, and that sounds great for the users, but all of the information from the publishers on which that overview is based is now buried below, so there's arguably no need for the consumer to ever click a link again. So there's something that needs to be addressed there.
No, wait.
From
So what? I'm sorry.
It's
Hang on.
on the input
you,
side and the output side.
You've spoken for quite a while. Allow me to respond, Peter. So,
I always do.
okay, so why do we have copyright laws? Why did the United States government create this monopoly grant to authors? And the purpose of it is not to protect publishers, and it's not to establish a business model. In fact, the word publisher doesn't exist in the Constitution. It's there for the advancement of society, specifically to advance the useful arts and sciences, to better society.
It's also there for, I have it written here, for protecting the exclusive rights of the copyright holder. That's what it's all.
Okay, guys, thank you. Got heated there. Okay. So next up is Karissa responding to Guy. Go ahead, and you can take the 10 minutes and argue between yourselves.
I think we'll do that, shall we?
I think we agree more than we disagree on things.
Yes,
You wanna start? Go ahead.
Well, yes, but I'm going to pick up on a couple of points and correct me if I'm wrong. But I think you said you talked about the algorithmic work that will be replaced, which absolutely that is where the AI of today is very powerful. What I would disagree with is that it destroys jobs. It's simply an evolution of jobs to a new technology, and that's the analogy that I was making around digital. Yes, there are a large number of jobs based on the old ways of doing things that will disappear, but there are an equally large number of jobs that will be created through the tools that are developed with AI to replace those jobs. Again, take Sora, which I'm sure everyone has seen the demonstration videos of. You can see how one can create film-like output without a camera, without an actor, without any input of the traditional sense whatsoever, but you still need that human element to create. So,
I'll give you an example, and I think it's the theory of trickle-down economics. So eventually, there'll be jobs for everyone. If you just, lower the taxes for the wealthy, there will be. So your idea is that there will be new jobs created by AI. So even if you're displaced in the current world, you can go out and find a new one. And I think there's problems with that theory because, one, I redid our entire website for Dragonfruit in 1 month using AI. How many people would I have had to employ before to do that, right? Those people that didn't get that work, like if you look at advertising agencies, they're in some serious trouble because the basic flat creative, I'm not talking about good creative, I'm not talking about good films, I'm not talking about good TV, but most of our world is filled with just mediocre creative, right? Let's get real here. How many times do you have to go through Netflix to find something you actually want to watch? There's quantity, but there's not quality. So all of those jobs will go away. People earn their living doing those jobs today. How quickly can they be retrained? Where will they be retrained? Who's going to pay for them to get retrained, to get into something that's productive? And I'll leave the counterpoint to this with a conversation I had with a friend of mine who has a 16-year-old son. And she was saying, oh yeah, we were talking about career trajectories for him. And I said, look, you need to think about something that AI can't replace. You should be a dentist, right? Like that's her career advice to her son. But she's not wrong. Like there are choices, and we've seen it throughout, and it is history, right? Like look at the Rust Belt we have in this country. Look at the garment industry. Look at all of these things. Yes, will there be other jobs that need to be filled? But where are those jobs? Where's the education to educate people to fill those jobs? There is serious displacement that's coming, not in 5 years from now. It's beginning to happen right now. If you work at an ad agency, you should be very, very worried. If you work as a copywriter in Hollywood, just doing basic, mediocre copy, you should be very, very worried. If you work on the filming side of it, you should be very, very worried. Because guess what? Your job is going to go away sooner rather than later, and AI will take it, and there'll be no replacement for you.
yeah, I think we fundamentally agree on that transition and that shift. But we've been there so many times before. There are probably 1,000 examples in the last 150 years. So, you know, can I say, so what? We evolve. The world evolves. The jobs marketplace. 5 years ago, the advice to young people was learn coding. I mean, AI is brilliant at coding.
So we use AI for coding as well. We use AI for QA. No, computer science is not immune to this upheaval either. 30% of the jobs are algorithmic and can be replaced by AI.
Yeah.
Just think about that, of the jobs you know today, and start to look around you of the people who feed their families and go to work every day. I mean, why can't we use AI to replace politicians? That'd be a treat.
I think the word I'm disagreeing with is agreeing and disagreeing. Yes, they will be replaced. But the point is, the net number of jobs will not reduce by 30%.
We'll see. We'll see. Thus the Wall-E as my door number 4 here of what will happen. What do we choose as a society to do with this kind of upheaval? In the past, if you look back, there are always winners and losers. And you can see that if you go through Ohio and Pennsylvania and Maine and Vermont, like all of these industrial changes have brought winners and losers. And some of those losers haven't really recovered. And we as a society either can be deliberate about it and be honest about what's happening, or we can pretend, oh, well, there'll be new jobs for them. Don't worry, they're going to find something else to do. Really? Do we have history of that, doing that well?
Let me give you one more analogy. YouTube. Digital cameras and YouTube. They opened up the ability to produce content to a 15-year-old in their bedroom. High quality digital content. YouTube gave them a global distribution platform. Did it destroy Hollywood? Did it destroy the media industry? Did it have a net reduction on the number of jobs in the industry? Quite the contrary. AI is providing tools for creativity that will at least equal what we have today in terms of the opportunity, if not increase the opportunity.
But I think similar to the debate that we heard over here, it is an argument about who does that value accrue to. Because in the short and medium run, there will be winners and losers. I can say my husband does work in the industry, so he translates and does subtitling for a living. First it was offshoring, now it's AI. He will be out of a job within a year.
Yeah. Yeah,
at most, right?
We agree on that.
Right? But that's only one example. Sound editing. There's a variety of things where people make their living doing this. They're, in their 40s and 50s. You can say they're going to go out and become what?
Let me pick up on another point. I think you also said that the creative side could not be replaced.
I do believe that. I do believe that's my optimistic side is, if you think about really good creative, a film or a book or a music piece that moves you, that I think is really good creative. Now, I'm not talking about pablum. I'm talking about like, wow. I'm reading The Covenant of Water right now. It's an amazing book. Could AI have written that book? I don't think so. I think that there is a part of what it means to be human, the emotional part of us, the visionary creative part of us, that it will be a long time before AI can replace that. I'm not saying if ever, because I do believe in the sci-fi. They've inspired me. However, really good creative is going to be hard for AI to do. But everyday creative, all day long.
Yeah, again, I keep saying this, and it doesn't really make sense, but I agree and disagree completely. I mean, the whole point of generative AI is it is creating something new, and that was brought up in the other discussion, and where that refers to copyright. Take it back and tell me what art that you see today is not derivative.
No, I think it's an interesting and fascinating, the points that they were arguing about. It's true. What does it mean to take an art class, an art history class? How do artists inform themselves today? Obviously, it's based on the shoulders of the giants that came before them. So is the speeding up of this or the automation of this somehow wrong? How do you say that, right? But I do think, again, that leap into, and I actually don't know the answer, maybe someone in the room does or someone on this panel. There is a case at MoMA here right? Where there was an artist who used AI to take all the pieces that were in there, and they were using Gen AI in real time. So every person that came in front of this canvas was something new. Like that to me, as a combination of physical art, performance art, etc., is creative because it was a human who thought of it for the very first time. It wasn't like the machine just started doing it on its own. That is creativity. So I think there are intersections of the human part and AI that can be quite compelling. I think it's the practical things that concern me about the world that we're living in today. And the fact that I'm a political scientist by training. I don't have a lot of confidence in government to catch up. They're just not good at this. A, they don't understand it, and B, they're being paid for by a variety of lobbyists. So I think there are problems with that, but I do think that there is creative possibilities that are open now with AI that we didn't have before. And it's amazing what people can create, what humans can think of to use these tools for. And on that, I see a positive. I do agree with you.
Yeah, and that's where we fundamentally agree. And the point I would make is behind every great AI is a great human. And that's often what gets lost in the discussions about AI, partly because everyone starts thinking about Terminator.
Okay, way to go. Okay. Great discussion. We're going to go into closing statements, starting with Robert. 2 minutes.
With full respect, I disagree with you. So I know you're on my team, and I guess that makes this a little awkward for debate. But
He's disagreed with me, so it's okay.
we are about to experience an incredible unlock in human productivity because of these tools. And what you need to understand is, in order to unlock productivity gains, jobs must be destroyed. You hear these figures, 30% of jobs, 40% of jobs are somehow at risk of being lost to automation. That's not new. That's been true since Thomas Makerman invented the steam engine 300 years ago. Automation destroys jobs. That's true. The jobs it destroys are those of manual labor, repetitive stuff. That's also true. And that's going to continue into the future regardless of this debate. The only way to increase wages without increasing inflation is to unlock productivity gains, because that's what creates the pool of profit from which future earnings increases come from. Without that, you cannot do it. If we want to increase wages, you've got to destroy jobs. On a given year in a healthy economy, 4% of jobs are destroyed. So somebody tells you in 10 years we're going to destroy 40% of jobs. That's normal. That's not abnormal. You gave us 4 examples of possible future scenarios, and all of them were dystopian, whether it's the Terminator or Blade Runner or something else. I want to think for a moment about the great unlock when the half of humanity that are below average writers suddenly have the ability to be good writers. Not great writers, but good writers by using an AI assist. Or the half of humanity that are lousy at illustration and can't make pictures on their own, suddenly with the AI assist can become expressive in a new way where they never were able to make pictures before. And that's just the beginning. Because what we're starting to see now is agentic workflows where you can start to connect together different LLMs and start to think about how you create or what you do in your professional life. And that might involve working with collaborators or partners or other people in your company. Soon, you'll be able to interlock AI throughout that entire process. And by the way, we're at the very, very beginning of this right now.
Okay, thank you. On to Peter.
I'm going to do rapid fire comments. First of all, I agree with virtually everything you said there. The biggest impediment to mass adoption in the media and entertainment business is all the hanging potential liability out there. So big tech has a chance to resolve that and move things forward. So that's one thing. Secondly, I'm really glad that you raised the question of just whether generative AI can create something entirely novel or whether there's something divine about human artistry, because that's a huge debate in the creative community. And if you haven't read Rick Rubin's book on that, I'm sure you have, Brian, then you should read that book. So I think that's something that gets lost in some of these discussions that we have, that we're talking about art. We're in a business of art. That's very cool. Okay, just echoing the point of, for everybody out there, it's going to impact everybody. And so it's critical to not just think that this is kind of floating around back there, but learn as much as you can, educate yourself about the language, all of that. I think that's really important. Follow some cool examples. I'm gonna identify a couple companies. In the AI dubbing space, check out Flawless. Think about Ryan Gosling starring in Ken Roll's Forever and Ever and Ever. Gen AI can de-age him or it can age him. Like this is going to be a real thing with A-list talent and whether that's going to replace new talent. Audience participation. This is a cool thing that nobody's touched upon, and we agree on this, where the artist Grimes out there has made her songs available and her voice available to her audience and says, go to town on it. It's an interesting experiment, and all she asks in that particular case is that if a song hits, she shares in 50% of the revenues. So there are new business models that I absolutely agree with. Like, there the artist consented to it and created something that's really interesting, and I applaud that completely. So those are some examples that I think are worth checking out. Also in the generative video space, a state-of-the-art example is a new video that a music video by Paul Trillo for the band Washed Out. Check that out. It's the first music video fully created on Sora.
Thank you. On to Karissa. Sum it up.
So social scientist Karissa says this: we as humans are suffering. We're suffering from loneliness. We're suffering from a lack of connectivity. We're suffering from things that we ourselves have helped to create and perpetuate. So I'm all for making money. I live in and enjoy a great career from that. But there are consequences to what we're talking about here. Consequences that aren't actually making us happier or better as humans. And what about that? Are we just going to keep focusing on how much money we can make and who does the money go to? Or are we actually going to sit back and say, what is the impact to our society of continuing on this path that we are? Back to this point of jobs and job loss. What happens to those people? They're people. We as humans need to feel a sense of purpose and impact. That's what I wrote this book on with my co-author. And we've actually researched this. If you don't have a job, that actually harnesses your talents, you don't feel like a productive member of society. That is part of the mental crisis we have in this country. Our youth are despairing of their future because we're destroying our planet, all in the name of what? Of progress. So when we talk about this, talk about all of it. Talk about right now, here, today. Talk about tomorrow. What is the tomorrow we want to create? Could AI help us do a lot of great things? It sure can. But this discussion of this question of who are the winners and losers is not a small one. And it isn't going to be solved by this debate. But all of us need to be more conscious of the choices that we're making and how we go about making the livings that we make. Because there are winners and losers, but let's not be kidded into ourselves of thinking that the only way to increase wages is to actually fire people. Really? What are the bonuses of Hollywood's top elite? What are the bonuses of tech's top elite? When we talk about winners and losers, that gap between winners and losers is really getting wider and wider in this country. And it worries me because we have a society that we all live in this country together. Venezuela was the longest running democracy in Latin America until it wasn't. Chavez was democratically elected. Think about that.
Okay, thank you. And finishing with Guy.
It's interesting that we're so concerned about jobs because is this the first time that white-collar jobs have been threatened by a technological shift? I wonder. You know, I agree with you. 30% of jobs, it may be more. 100% of jobs will be impacted. I fully believe that 30% will change, not disappear. But I want to come back on the question of creativity and talk about myself for a bit. So I'm a keen amateur photographer. I never went digital. I still shoot film. I love going in the dark room. Or if you're a Zoomer who watches Stranger Things, the Red Room. The point being that photography is already awash with AI. There are hundreds of AI-generated images being posted as photographs, in inverted commas. The Northern Lights last week, there were hundreds of AI-enhanced Northern Lights photos on photography enthusiast groups. 99% of the comments underneath, amazing photograph, right? So does that matter? Do we get to the question of, is it a photograph? Is it creative? Does that matter? Is that question even valid? People love it. It's an image that people love. 99%, the 1% who dismiss it immediately as AI are the Luddites. But someone has created that image, and it's not that easy at the moment, frankly, to create a really nice image with a text-to-image AI software. You have to keep iterating and go, yeah, you know, I don't want 6 fingers on the left hand. Can you have another go, kind of thing. But my point being, it's still create.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry I didn't get to your point. Great summaries all. I'll just summarize. I love the fact that, Karissa, you brought up the human side, the humanity, the impact, things we do need to think about. I agree with Guy that it'll be creating new jobs that will account for and grow more than the deficit from the loss of jobs. That's been the history since birth of television. And you guys arguing so much, I love it, because these are things we need to talk about, is what is copying, what is ownable, what is copyrightable, and how did these laws originate? Do they apply today, or do we need to take human imagination and reimagine what legal is, what creativity is, what new products are, and new solutions to solving larger problems, trying to create that space that I talk about. How can we create that space where we can start to tackle larger social issues and not just the nuance of intellectual property and creativity, but solve some of these larger problems with AI? It's all possible. It's a choice. It takes imagination, and that is human. So we all have hope. I want to thank Marion and Evan for inviting us all to the conference and speaking. Thanks to the speakers, and give them a round of applause.